She was 47 years old and dying. Tuberculosis had been consuming her lungs for months, each breath a reminder that time was running out. In those early hours of a September morning, she needed just 4 pennies. 4 miserable coins for a place to sleep. It was 5:30 a.m. when someone saw her alive for the last time. Half an hour later, Annie Chapman would be dead. But not from the disease. Not in the way she imagined. And that difference changed everything. Annie Eliza Smith. She was born in September 1840 in Paddington, West London. Her father was a soldier in the Royal Guard, George Smith, a man in a bright red uniform and rigid posture. Annie grew up watching that pride, that dignity. She knew what it was to have a last name that meant something. At 28, Annie married John Chapman. He was a coachman, working for wealthy families. At first, it was good. They had 3 children. Emily Ruth in 1870, Annie Georgina in 1873, John Alfred in 1880. 3 names. 3 lives depended on her. 3 reasons to get up every day, even when everything hurt. But here is the truth no one tells you about Victorian London. You could do everything right and still lose it all. Emily Ruth, the first daughter, died at 12. Meningitis. Annie held the girl's hand while the fever consumed her small body. Can you imagine? Watching your daughter waste away and not being able to do anything. Absolutely nothing. Just watch. After that, something broke. In the marriage. In life. John Chapman started drinking heavily. Annie did too. When the pain is too big, sometimes you look for anything that makes it smaller, even if just for a few hours. They separated in 1882. Annie was left with a small allowance from him. 10 shillings a week. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was the difference between having a roof and sleeping on the street. In 1886, John Chapman died. Cirrhosis. Alcohol finally won. And with his death, Annie's allowance ended. Suddenly, those 10 weekly shillings simply vanished. Now think about it. You are a 46-year-old woman in London in 1886. No husband, no fixed income, with tuberculosis starting to scrape your lungs. What do you do? Annie did what thousands of women did. She survived however she could. She sold flowers on the street. Crochet roses she made with her own hands. She would stand for hours on Liverpool Street, holding her thread flowers, discreetly coughing blood into an old handkerchief. Some days she sold enough to eat. Other days she didn't. But Annie had something a lot of people didn't. She had a huge heart. The people who knew her say that. Dark Annie, they called her. Not because she was bad, but because she had dark hair and eyes. She shared the little she had. If she got a piece of bread, she split it with whoever was hungry. In a lodging house full of desperate people, Annie was the one who asked if you were okay. She was in a relationship with a man named Edward Stanley. He was a sieve maker working at a bakery near Spitalfields. It wasn't marriage, just company. Someone so she wouldn't be completely alone in this brutal world. They saw each other on weekends when he wasn't working. Stanley said Annie was kind, that she had a good heart, that the illness was slowly consuming her. At the beginning of 1888, Annie was living in a lodging house on Dorset Street, number 35. Dorset Street had a reputation. It was known as the worst street in London. Crime, drink, despair. But for Annie, it was home. It was where she could pay 8 pennies a night for a bed. 8 pennies. The price of 2 mugs of cheap beer. She woke up early, even while sick. Went out to sell her flowers, to take any odd job that came up. She came back at night with empty pockets more often than she would like to admit. And when she didn't have the 8 pennies, the lodging house keeper threw her out. No exceptions. It didn't matter if it was raining. It didn't matter if you were coughing blood. No money, no bed. People at the lodging house liked Annie. Amelia Palmer was her friend. They talked, shared stories, laughed when they could find something to laugh about. Annie had a dry sense of humor, the kind of humor of someone who has seen too much to be shocked by anything. But in the last months of her life, something changed. The tuberculosis got worse. Annie was visibly thinner. Her hands shook. The cough became constant, deep, painful. She knew. You look in the mirror, and you know when death is coming. Annie Chapman knew she was dying. It was only a matter of time. And maybe, just maybe, that's what made her lower her guard on that September morning. Because when you are already dying, what else can hurt you, right? She had been having a brutal first week of September 1888. Tuberculosis was winning. She could barely breathe without feeling that sharp pain in her chest, as if someone were squeezing her lungs with their hands. But pain did not pay rent. Pain did not put food on the table. So Annie kept going. On the 1st of September, she had a nasty fight at the Dorset Street lodging house. A woman named Eliza Cooper. They argued over a piece of soap. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Two women fighting over soap. But when you have nothing, every little thing matters. The fight got serious. Eliza punched Annie, hitting her square in the eye. Annie was left with a huge bruise, the eye almost swollen shut. Amelia Palmer saw everything. She helped Annie afterward, pressing a cold cloth against her swollen face. "You need to rest, Annie," Amelia said. But Annie shook her head in that stubborn way she had. "I can't. I need the pennies." In the days that followed, Annie got even sicker. She went to the infirmary casual ward, a kind of hospital for the poor. She stayed there from the 2nd to the 4th of September, trying to recover. But places like that did not cure anyone of tuberculosis. They just gave you a bed and waited to see if you would get better on your own or die quietly. Annie left on the 5th. She was different. Thinner. Paler. Amelia Palmer almost did not recognize her. "My God, Annie, you look like a ghost." Annie tried to smile. "I feel like one too." But she had to work. She always had to work. Annie spent 5, 6, and the 7th of September trying to sell her crochet flowers, trying to get a few pennies doing odd jobs. She washed clothes when she could, carried crates at the market, anything, but her body could not take it anymore. She could barely stand for an hour without needing to sit down. Edward Stanley, the man she was seeing, had not been with her for almost 2 weeks. He was working double shifts at the bakery. Later, when he learned what had happened, he would say he regretted that for the rest of his life. Not being there, not giving her the pennies she needed. Then came Friday, the 7th of September 1888, a day that started like any other terrible day in Annie Chapman's life. She woke up at the Dorset Street lodging house feeling worse than ever. The cough was out of control. She spat small amounts of blood, trying to hide it from the others so they would not be scared. Or worse, so she would not be thrown out. No one wanted a woman dying of tuberculosis sleeping in the bed next to them. During the day, Annie tried to work, but she couldn't. Her body just wouldn't obey anymore. She spent most of the day sitting in corners, leaning against walls, trying to gather strength. In the afternoon, she was in the lodging house kitchen when the deputy, Timothy Donovan, found her. "Annie, have you got today's 8 pennies?" Annie looked at him with those sunken, exhausted eyes. "Not yet, Tim, but I'll get them. You know the rules." "I know. Just give me a few more hours." Donovan shook his head. He wasn't a cruel man, just a man enforcing rules in a world where rules were the only thing keeping anything running. "Until 10 o'clock, Annie. If you don't have the money, you know what happens." Annie spent the afternoon desperately trying to get those 8 pennies. She went to Spitalfields looking for Edward Stanley, but he wasn't there. She went to a few places where she usually sold flowers, but no one was buying. It was late afternoon on an ordinary Friday. People had their own problems. 11 p.m. Annie went back to the lodging house. She went in through the kitchen, where Donovan and the night watchman, John Evans, were. She was staggering a bit, holding on to the wall to keep from falling. "Tim, I didn't get the money." "Then you can't stay." Annie looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, just tiredness. A tiredness so deep it went beyond the body. "Don't send me out yet. I'm sick. Rules are rules, Annie." She sighed. In that sigh was a lifetime of small surrenders. Doors slammed in her face, and "I can't help you." Annie started to leave, but stopped at the door. She turned and said something that would be forever burned into John Evans's memory. "It doesn't matter. I won't be long. I'll see if I can get the money for the bed." And she left. It was 1:45 a.m. on Saturday, the 8th of September, 1888. Annie Chapman, 47 years old, with advanced tuberculosis and a black eye from the fight a week earlier, went out into the dark streets of Whitechapel looking for 4 pennies. Because now she only needed 4 pennies for a bed in an even cheaper lodging house. 4 coins. The price of half a loaf of bread. The price of half a mug of cheap gin. Amelia Palmer saw her around 2 a.m. near Dorset Street. "Annie, where are you going?" Annie stopped, holding on to a fence to keep her balance. "I need money for a bed." "You look awful. Come back. I'll lend you some." "No, Amelia. I already owe you too much." "I'll manage." "How?" Annie didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew. When a desperate woman goes out at 2 a.m. in Whitechapel looking for quick money, there is only one way. Amelia watched Annie disappear into the darkness. Later, she would say she never forgave herself for not going after her, for not dragging Annie back, even by force. Annie spent the next few hours wandering the streets. Elizabeth Long, a local resident, saw her around 5:30 a.m. on Hanbury Street, talking to a man. Elizabeth did not see his face, but remembers Annie saying something quietly. The man replied. Then the two of them turned toward the small backyard of number 29. John Richardson, who lived there, had passed through that same yard at 4:45 a.m. He had sat on the steps to fix his boot. He swore later that the yard was empty. Completely empty. At 5:30 a.m. Annie Chapman walked into that yard with a stranger. At 6 a.m. John Davis, another resident of number 29, went down to use the outside toilet in the yard. When he opened the back door, he saw something that made him scream. Annie was on the ground, but not just dead, destroyed. Her neck had been cut so deeply it had almost decapitated her. But worse than that, much worse, was what had been done to the rest of her. There's no need to describe it. That's not why this story is being told. It is enough to know that whoever did it did not just want to kill. They wanted to send a message. They wanted to shock. They wanted the whole world to know that a monster was loose. The police arrived quickly. Dr. George Bagster Phillips was the first doctor to examine the body. He was an experienced man who had seen a lot. But when he looked at Annie Chapman that September morning, he turned pale. Later, at the inquest, he would say, "I had never seen anything like it, and I pray I never will again." Annie's belongings were found neatly arranged near her body. 2 halfpenny coins, a broken comb, a piece of paper with a blue Sussex Society seal, a torn envelope. Those were all of Annie Chapman's earthly possessions. Everything she had in the world fit into 2 hands. The news spread through Whitechapel like fire. It's happened again, because just 8 days earlier, Marion Nichols had been killed in the same brutal way a few streets away. Now there were two, and everyone knew there would be more. Annie Chapman was 47 years old when she died, but her death changed London forever. When the news spread through the East End that Saturday morning, something different happened. With Mary and Nichols, 8 days earlier, people were shocked. But with Annie, it was different. It was anger. It was real fear, because now everyone understood. This had not been an isolated crime. It was a pattern, and no one was safe. Hanbury Street turned into a circus. Thousands of people crowded around number 29, wanting to see the place. The police had to block off the entire street. Women screamed. Men demanded justice. Children ran between the adults' legs, trying to catch a glimpse of the yard where Annie had been found. The inquest started that same day at the Working Lads Institute in Whitechapel. The coroner, Wynne Baxter, led the hearings. One by one, the people who had known Annie were called to testify. And it was there, in those hours of testimony, that the world finally learned who Annie Chapman really was. Amelia Palmer cried on the witness stand. She was my friend. She shared everything she had. If Annie had a piece of bread and you were hungry, she'd give you half, even if that meant she'd go hungry. Timothy Donovan, the lodging house deputy, had to admit in front of everyone that he had turned Annie out at 1:45 in the morning. Can you imagine the weight of that? Knowing that if he had let her stay just that one night, Annie would be alive? He would carry that for the rest of his life. And he did. Edward Stanley was called to identify the body. He walked into the mortuary, looked at Annie on that cold table, and broke down. I should have been there. I should have given her the money. 4 pennies. That's all she needed. 4 pennies was what he spent on tobacco in a day. Dr. Phillips wrote the post-mortem report. Beyond the obvious injuries, he found something that broke everyone's heart in that room. Annie was in an advanced state of malnutrition. Her lungs were destroyed by tuberculosis. She also had a disease in her brain. Annie Chapman had been dying for months, slowly, painfully. If she had not been murdered, Dr. Phillips said quietly, she might have had a few weeks to live. At most, let that sink in for a second. Annie was dying. She knew it. Every day was a battle against pain, against exhaustion, against a body that was simply giving up. And even so, she kept trying. She kept waking up. She kept looking for those damned pennies, because giving up was not in Annie Chapman's vocabulary. The press exploded. Newspapers around the world covered the case, but most of them focused on the monster, on the mystery, on wild theories about who the killer was. Very few talked about Annie, about her life, about the fact that she was a real person with a real story who deserved more than to become just the second victim. But some people understood. Some people saw beyond the horror and noticed something bigger. Annie Chapman's case exposed the rot at the heart of Victorian London. How was it possible that women had to choose between starving to death or risking their lives on the streets at 2 a.m.? How was it possible that 4 pennies could be the difference between safety and death? Charity groups began to form, shelters for homeless women, campaigns to change housing laws. Annie did not live to see any of that. But her death, so brutal and so public, forced society to look at a problem everyone preferred to ignore. Annie's funeral took place on the 14th of September, 1888, at Manor Park Cemetery. Hundreds of people showed up, not because they were famous or rich, but because they were like Annie, invisible people, forgotten people. And for the first time, someone was paying attention. Her children were there. Annie Georgina, now a young woman. John Alfred, still a child. They watched their mother be buried in a common grave. No headstone, no name. Just one more among thousands. But here is what you need to understand. Annie Chapman was not just one more. She was a woman who loved her children more than anything in the world, who held her daughter's hand as she died of meningitis, who made crochet flowers with fingers trembling from hunger, who shared the little she had with those who had even less, who got up every single day, even when every breath hurt, who kept her sense of humor even when life took everything from her. Annie Chapman deserved more. She deserved a life without pain. She deserved not to have to choose between dignity and survival. She deserved to die in peace, surrounded by people she loved, not alone in a filthy backyard at 6 a.m. Today, more than 135 years later, we still talk about Jack the Ripper. Movies, series, books, podcasts. Everyone obsessed with the monster. But how many of us know Annie Chapman's name? How many know that she liked flowers, that she had a gentle smile, that they called her Dark Annie, not because she was cruel, but because she had dark hair and deep eyes? The truth is this: we let the killer win every time we forget the victims. So let this be clear. The one who truly wins this story is not the monster in the shadows who was never caught. It's Annie, because 135 years later, here we are, talking about her, remembering her, honoring who she was. Annie Chapman deserves to be remembered, not as the second victim, but as Annie, mother, friend, survivor, fighter,